I've been thinking, which should worry you. I think too much. Actually, my first therapist, when I got into recovery from alcoholism, I found out after she'd been working with me for a while that she had called me the bulldog. She didn't tell me that while she was working with me. She said that I was the kind of guy who, if he got a bone in his mouth, he just wouldn't stop worrying that bone until he was completely done with it. So I picked up a bone recently. Happened in the middle of the night. I'd been talking to Dwayne Smith, who's one of our members. Dwayne's the world champion of public speaking, and he recently dropped his membership. You all may or may not have known this, but he'd been sick for a while. And he told me that for the first time in more than 20 years, he was no longer a Toastmaster anywhere. That bothered me. That bothered me a lot. I honored he was taking care of himself, but I began to worry it might not end and we might be losing Dwayne. And for the life of me, I can't imagine a world without Dwayne Smith. I cannot get my head around that. It pained me, so much so that I lost a lot of sleep. And I don't know about you all, but once my thinker gets started, the bad news is that one of my clients is the Centers for Disease Control, and I know the data on death. I know you're not supposed to talk about death, but did you know that today, and every single day of the year, about 250 to 300,000 people are going to die? Today. 250,000 people. It's amazing, given that we don't talk. It's almost like we don't talk about it, and it's like it doesn't really happen. Except my mentor, Sam, would always say, nobody gets out alive. 250,000 people. And the part of the data that disturbed me was when I found out I'm 62 years old, and I'm right smack in the middle of the great, great old white guy die-off curve. Yeah, what that means is that between about 57 and 63 or 64, old white guys have a habit of dropping dead at a disturbingly frequency from all kinds of things. Just like all those people who died today, all kinds of things. And that got me thinking. At 3:30 in the morning, I started wondering whether or not anything I've done with my life matters. I suspect you've had those conversations with yourself where you look around looking for evidence that something you've done added up to something. And if you're really honest with yourself, you realize that you'd be hard-pressed to explain that any of it actually mattered. The things that you tried that reverted or failed. I mean, the hope for dreams that you've had this impact on people, and if you're honest with yourself, you see that they probably had this trajectory that had absolutely nothing to do with you in the first place. But because you're an ego-based human, you said to yourself, look at all these wonderful things I did. There's a great spiritual teacher, a guy from Goethe School, who said, if you look real hard, it's really hard to prove that you may have made a contribution to anything. Which is disturbing stuff at 3:30 in the morning. So I didn't sleep that night. The next night, I was still disturbed by the possibility of a world without Dwayne Smith, who, if you can't tell, I have come to love tremendously. I mean, the good news is he's well and he's going to come back. They figured it out, which is a beautiful thing. But the next night, I had this really disturbing dream. Anybody ever had one of those really, really visceral, disturbing, wake you up, sweaty palms dreams? Anybody ever had one of those? Yeah, I had one of those. I was driving down the road. I have no idea where I was going to. And all of a sudden, my windshield exploded. There was no cause. It just exploded. And suddenly, I'm driving at 70 miles an hour with the wind buffeting my face. And I don't know what to make of this dream. So I called my present therapist. I have a long history with therapy because I think too much. And she said, Ron, that sounds to me like your worldview is getting ready to be transformed. I said, damn, that sounds far better than I imagined. I thought maybe it was a sign of my own impending death. Which, by the way, if you didn't know this, humans don't like grappling with the possibility that we're going to someday disappear from planet Earth, which is why those obituaries for all those 250,000 people, if they're anywhere, They're really tiny print on the very last page where nobody will find them unless you're looking for them. It's very disturbing to us. So that day, without the sleep and having had my windscreen shattered, I had a couple conversations with a couple of dear friends, and part of the shift began. I started wondering if in this lifetime I will see a female president, which I will do almost anything for, because we are long overdue for the old white guy model to get disintegrated and have something new emerge. Which is how paradigms shift, right? Paradigms shift when it shatters, just like my windscreen. And suddenly something new emerges. We don't know what it'll be because it's a paradigm shift. And then I started wondering, and this is one I have a lot of heartbreak about that I don't talk about. I started wondering if all my black-skinned and brown-skinned friends, some of whom are precious to me, would in my lifetime finally get out from under all of that bullshit that they've had to put up with. And I don't know. I started wondering whether or not some of the young people I know, including some members of this club, some who I coach and mentor, I started wondering if I would get a chance to see their lives bear the fruit that I think is probably coming down the path. Because there's some magnificent stuff going on, stuff that is, it's just not part of my reality. I'm 62 and a half years old, and there's things happening that, I'm becoming antiquated. That's really true. What came out of this is a realization that in a lot of ways, I'm becoming increasingly less relevant, which is difficult to digest when you think you've been relevant, when in fact you've been maybe deluded about how relevant you've been. It's all very disturbing stuff. And then I saw this great deal online because there's only so long I can contemplate. And I went online and I saw this magnificent video of the Muppets. And the Muppets have introduced a new character. She's a foster child. And she's a person of color. She has dark skin. And it's this beautiful, magnificent story of how they're using Muppets to teach us important things that are changing in the world because they need to change. And I thought, God damn, it's working. There is something happening. All is not lost. It's not all in vain. But it's so slow. It's microscopic at times, isn't it? So then I was fixated on Muppets for a while, and I went through this long process of searching Muppet reels and it just completely changed the whole deal. So that brings me back to this. This is an Indonesian meditation bowl. Spiritual practitioners set and meditate upon this. It's made out of ivory. You can see the little eyes on both sides. It's very, very old. And they say, these spiritual masters, they say that if you study something long enough, if you just focus your attention and just pay attention, that at some point in time, that meditation ball will move of its own accord, and you will see a miracle. And I realized I'm watching for miracles. Toastmasters.